Welcome to the debate. Imagine two people in like a pitch black room.
Yeah, totally blind to what the other wants.
Exactly. They are locked in this exhausting tug of war over a piece of rope.
Right, pulling with all their might.
And they are completely unaware that one of them only wants the frayed end to, thread a needle, and the other just wants the thick center to tie a knot. So we often assume human conflict means fighting over the exact same thing.
Which brings us to the classic negotiation parable. The sisters and the orange.
Right, the Mary Parker Follett thought experiment.
Yeah. Three sisters fighting over the last orange in their inherited orchard. A neighbor intervenes, cuts it into equal thirds, and everyone just leaves miserable.
Right, a total failure of resolution.
But then the next year, another fight arises over a final orange, and a different neighbor, or the same neighbor in some versions, actually asks why they need it.
Right, he asks for the underlying reason.
Exactly. And it turns out one wants the juice, one wants the zest, and one wants the seeds to plant. Complete satisfaction.
Which brings us to the core question we are unpacking today. Does this classic scenario prove that empathy and relational dialogue are like the absolute necessary foundations for resolving conflict?
Or is it something else entirely?
Right. I will be arguing that they are. That without that relational light in the dark room, resolution is just impossible.
And I will be making the case for rational choice theory. I mean, this is really a story about the triumph of functional resource management and overcoming the cognitive trap of assumed scarcity. It is an information problem, not a feelings problem.
Well, look at why that first year failed so miserably. A sterile, mathematical compromise like a clean one-third split completely ignores the human element.
But it is mathematically fair.
It is fair, sure. But the second year only succeeded because the neighbor introduced a relational lens. He explicitly asked why they were tearing each other apart, quote, as sisters.
I think you're reading too much into the as sisters part.
I really don't think so. That specific, empathetic intervention is what broke the tension, allowing them to actually communicate. The text points directly to their future harmony being based on prioritizing dialogue and empathy.
See, I think using the word empathy here completely miscategorizes the actual mechanism of the dispute. The sisters didn't need to, connect on a spiritual level to solve this. They simply needed to state their functional requirements.
But they couldn't do that while screaming.
Sure, but our brains are evolutionarily hardwired for zero-sum thinking. When we see one resource, cognitive bias immediately tells us that your gain equals my loss.
Right.
So the first year's failure was caused by this assumption of identical utility. The second year succeeded because they finally defined their specific utility parameters: juice, peel, seeds.
Because they were asked about their feelings.
Because they were asked for data. The neighbor didn't solve an emotional crisis. He bypassed a cognitive bottleneck to achieve informational efficiency.
Okay, but you are applying a really cold analytical framework to a situation the text describes with intense emotional language. The sisters were actively shouting and, quote, tearing each other apart.
People shout when they lack resources.
Yeah, but how can mere informational efficiency possibly be achieved in that state? Emotional de-escalation is the mandatory prerequisite before any rational data exchange about juice or seeds can even occur.
Is it really mandatory, though?
I mean, yes. You can't hand a spreadsheet to someone who is screaming at you.
Well, look at the actual nature of the neighbor's first intervention, though. His initial advice to cut the orange into 3 equal parts was completely logical given the lack of data he had.
Logical maybe, but not helpful.
It was equitable. The sisters explicitly claimed they absolutely needed the orange. Without specific utility data, an equal physical split is the most rational, equitable distribution of a perfectly scarce resource.
It is an abdication of responsibility, though.
How so? The fault lies entirely with the sisters for withholding their specific needs, not with the neighbor for lacking empathy.
I have to push back there. That first solution from the neighbor wasn't logical, it was intellectually lazy. It completely bypassed inquiry.
He worked with what he had.
But he didn't try to get more. Think of it this way. It is like a doctor prescribing a perfectly equal third of an aspirin to 3 shouting patients without ever asking where their pain is located.
Okay, that is an interesting analogy.
Right? It is a profound failure of inquiry masquerading as fairness. Just cutting the orange in 3 is an abdication of the responsibility to understand the underlying problem.
Yeah. But the doctor analogy assumes the neighbor is a diagnostician of pain. The text portrays him acting more like a systems analyst diagnosing an information bottleneck.
I don't see him as a systems analyst at all.
We'll look at these specific catalysts for the second-year success. The neighbor says, "Why didn't you inquire about the reasons each of you wanted this orange?"
Yes, exactly.
He is pointing out a data failure. If these three individuals were total strangers rather than sisters, the functional outcome, the distribution of juice, zest, and seeds, would remain exactly the same.
You really think so?
Absolutely. The familial, emotional bond you are highlighting is totally irrelevant to the mechanics of the actual solution.
See, I don't think you can divorce the neighbor's question from the relational context he deliberately invoked.
He didn't just ask for their utility metrics.
He basically did.
No, he specifically asked, "Why do you need this orange so badly that you're tearing each other apart as sisters?" That phrasing is doing massive structural work in the conflict resolution process.
It's just conversational filler in the story. It forced them to suddenly weigh the material value of the orange against the relational value of their kinship. That is what shifted their perspective from combative to collaborative.
But the text literally tells us what the realization was. The neighbor points out that they can all be satisfied without depriving anyone.
Because they cared about not depriving each other?
No, because it was non-rivalrous. That is the pivotal moment. They realized the conflict was entirely non-rivalrous, meaning one sister getting the seeds didn't subtract an ounce of value from the sister getting the juice.
Sure, the math worked out.
Once they understood that one person's gain didn't equal another person's loss, the conflict evaporated. They didn't achieve some higher state of spiritual empathy, they just figured out how to optimize a supply chain.
Optimization implies a very detached, transactional process. But look at the physical resolution described. They didn't just mathematically divide the orange in the middle of the field and walk away to their separate corners.
Right? They processed it together.
Exactly. They all went together to the first sister's house. The first sister squeezed the juice, then handed the peel to the second sister, who then gave the seeds to the third.
Which is just efficient processing.
It is a shared, sequential processing of the fruit that is a deeply collaborative act, requiring immense trust. The emotional bond was the glue holding that practical solution together.
Or it was trust based on verified data. They went to the house and processed it sequentially because they finally understood the mechanics of the fruit and their respective needs.
They still had to trust each other to follow through.
Sure, but they didn't argue ever again because they had a new framework for resource allocation, not just because they, hugged it out.
Well, to wrap up my side, I think this parable ultimately proves that superficial fairness, like the 1/3 split, is inherently flawed because it treats people as interchangeable variables.
It assumes too much, yes.
Right. True resolution requires the empathetic inquiry necessary to uncover human motivations. You have to actually care enough to ask why.
And I would summarize by saying that while dialogue is obviously essential, the fundamental lesson here is about avoiding the trap of assumed scarcity.
The false zero-sum game.
Exactly. By prioritizing precise definitional clarity and sharing utility data, we realize that we are rarely fighting over the exact same part of the orange.
Well, we certainly agree that the initial fair compromise, the equal split, was an abject failure.
Oh, unquestionably, it left everyone completely dissatisfied.
And we also agree that the simple act of asking why is the ultimate mechanism for unlocking superior outcomes.
Yes, the question why is the key, whether you view it as unlocking a data vault or breaking an emotional barrier.
Which leaves us to reflect on the core difference between positional bargaining, what people demand, and underlying interests, why they actually want it.
It is a huge distinction.
It really is. When we find ourselves pulling on that rope in the dark, the question remains whether we are better served by seeking emotional resonance with the person on the other side or by finally turning on the lights to gather better data.
There is still so much to unpack in how we navigate the conflicts in our lives.
Absolutely.